For 31 years, he sat at the family table. He passed the salt at Christmas. He stood at her funeral and mourned with the people whose daughter he had murdered. He looked her mother and father in the eye across the turkey at Thanksgiving, year after year after year, and he never said a word. He wasn't a stranger. He wasn't a gang member from the corner. He wasn't a faceless monster who climbed in from the dark and vanished. He was family, and the window he came through was never locked, because in that house, the family trusted each other completely. A warning to our viewers. What you are about to watch is a true story. The following program contains content that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Welcome to Crime View Central, where cold cases don't stay cold. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We read every single one. If you're new here, hit like and subscribe. That's what keeps us digging into cases like this one. Now, back to Kansas City, Missouri. July 1989. Fawn Marie Cox was 16 years old. While the wider world was beginning to sense that something enormous was shifting, the Cold War thawing, the old certainties cracking, Fawn was living a life made of much smaller and much sweeter things. She stood behind a cash register at Worlds of Fun, a sprawling amusement park on the edge of Kansas City, counting out change, handing over ticket stubs, smiling at families on their way in to ride the roller coasters. And she was saving every dollar she could. All summer long, her tips had been going into a careful pile, because Fawn had a goal. She wanted to buy her own car before her senior year. Not because she needed it, but because of what it represented. Independence, freedom, the ability to take herself wherever she wanted to go. A future that belonged to her. She had no idea that she had less than 12 hours left to live. Fawn lived in a two-story house at East 9th Street and Van Brunt Boulevard with her parents, John and Beverly Cox, and her two younger sisters, Amber and Felisa. In a family of 3 girls, Fawn was the eldest, and she wore that role the way responsible oldest daughters do. She helped raise her younger sisters. She worked long shifts without complaint. She roller skated with Amber and Felisa on weekends, the 3 of them moving together in the easy rhythm of sisters who genuinely liked each other, and she never missed church on Sundays. Her best friend, Donna McGee, lived directly across the street, close enough that the 2 of them could practically talk from their windows. On long Missouri summer evenings, they would sit outside together and talk about all the enormous, ordinary things that fill a 16-year-old's world. Boys, high school, the drama of who said what to whom. The future, stretching out ahead of them, endless and bright and assumed. Her sister, Amber, worshipped her. "I looked up to her so much," Amber would say many years later, when she could finally speak about it without breaking apart. "I wanted to be just like her. She was my protector. She stood up for me." That was who Fawn Cox was, a protector, the kind of older sister who stood between her siblings and the world. On the night of the 25th of July, 1989, she worked a full shift at the amusement park, the cash register dinging, families passing through, her feet aching from hours of standing on hard concrete. She had another shift the next day, and she was already thinking about her bed. To understand what happened to Fawn in the hours that followed, you have to understand one thing about the house on Van Brunt Boulevard. Not the neighborhood, though that matters. Not the gang activity nearby, though that matters too. The one thing you truly need to understand is the window. The Cox home sat in a tough part of Kansas City, in the shadow of a local gang known as the 9th Street Dogs, a group notorious for burglaries, thefts, and violence. Everyone in the neighborhood knew them. Most people feared them. It was the kind of area where, as one longtime local would later put it, people sometimes went missing and were simply never seen again. Just 5 years earlier, in 1984, a 20-year-old woman named Tracy Snow, a neighbor of the Cox family, had vanished from that same neighborhood and was never found. That was the backdrop of daily life on Van Brunt Boulevard. Danger was ambient. It was assumed to come from outside, from the streets, from the strangers and the gangs. And so the Cox family had done what families do. They had drawn their circle of trust tight, and inside that circle they felt safe. John and Beverly had given up their own dining room, converting it into a downstairs bedroom, so their three daughters could have more space upstairs. Fawn had her own room, across from the room Amber and Felisa shared. It was a gesture of love, parents sacrificing their own comfort for their children. But here is the detail that would matter more than anything else. The windows of that house were almost never locked. Years earlier, the family had accidentally locked themselves out, and Amber, the tomboy, fearless and quick, had scaled the side of the house, climbed up to Fawn's second-floor window, and let everyone back in. The family had laughed about it, and after that, it quietly became household policy. Keep the upstairs windows unlocked in summer, for ventilation, for the cool night breeze that made the upstairs heat bearable, for emergency access in case they ever locked themselves out again. It was practical. It was innocent. It was the logic of a family that believed the danger was always on the outside, never imagining it might already be standing inside their circle of trust. And out in the alley below those windows sat John's bright orange dumpster truck. It had been parked there so long that it had become invisible, just another part of the landscape, as unremarkable as a tree or a fence. Nobody thought about it anymore. That truck was about to become a ladder. This case took 31 years to crack. This channel takes weeks for each story, real records, real families. If Fawn's story is getting to you, hit like and subscribe. That's how CrimeView Central keeps going and keeps cases like this from staying cold. Stay with us. Around 11 o'clock on the night of July 25th, Beverly and Felisa drove out to Worlds of Fun to pick Fawn up from her shift. She slid into the back seat, exhausted, her feet sore, barely speaking on the drive home. All she wanted was sleep. She had to do it all again the next day. When they got home, the house was sweltering. Kansas City in late July is brutal, and the Cox family had only one air conditioning unit, a loud, ancient machine crammed into the window of the parents' downstairs bedroom. It rumbled and wheezed without stopping, like a dying engine, and it drowned out nearly every other sound in the house. The neighborhood outside, the alley, the night itself, everything disappeared under that mechanical roar. Because of the heat, Felisa had taken to sleeping on the couch in her parents' room, close to the only cool air in the house. But Fawn valued her privacy. She didn't mind the warmth upstairs if it meant having her own space, her own room, her own door. So while the rest of the family settled downstairs near the air conditioner, Fawn climbed the stairs alone. She changed into her nightshirt. Her bedroom door lock had been broken for months, so she did what she always did. She wedged a steak knife into the door frame, the blade catching the wood, holding the door shut. A teenager's improvised lock, a small act of self-protection in a house she believed was safe. Then she set her alarm for her next shift, climbed into bed, and closed her eyes. Downstairs, the air conditioner roared. John Cox, a famously deep sleeper, was already snoring. Beverly and Felisa drifted off on the couch in the cool room. Amber, the third sister, wasn't even home. She was across the street, babysitting for the night. The room Amber normally shared with Felisa sat empty. Fawn was alone upstairs. And somewhere in that house, perhaps already inside, perhaps still climbing the orange truck toward that unlocked window, someone who knew every room, every habit, every rhythm of that family, was moving through the dark. Sometime between midnight and 2 in the morning, the family's little poodle began to whimper. The dog was pregnant, normally calm, but now it became frantic, barking with an urgency that cut clean through even the rumble of the air conditioner downstairs. Felisa stirred on the couch, groggy and annoyed. She got up, went to the dog, spoke softly to it until it settled. Half asleep, she assumed the restlessness was just the pregnancy, the animal unsettled in the heat. She went back to bed. It was the only disturbance anyone in that house would remember from the entire night. But that dog knew. Animals sense things we cannot. That little poodle was sounding an alarm in the only language it had, and there was no one awake enough to understand it. The air conditioner hummed on. The family slept. And upstairs, behind a door held shut by nothing but a steak knife, in a room with a window that was never locked, the unthinkable was happening to Fawn Cox. Morning came slowly on the 26th of July, 1989. Around 9 or 10 o'clock, Fawn's alarm clock began to ring, one of those old, relentless, mechanical alarms built to wake the dead. It rang and rang and rang, and Fawn didn't turn it off. John Cox needed the upstairs bathroom, which connected to Fawn's room in the old, open layout of the house. He went up the stairs and past her door, noting the blaring alarm. He glanced in. Fawn was lying in bed, motionless, in an odd position. He noticed, with a father's instinct for his daughter's dignity, that something wasn't right about how she was lying. Concerned but not alarmed, assuming she had simply kicked off her covers in the heat and was sleeping deeply, he pulled a blanket up over her to preserve her modesty and continued on to the bathroom. He thought his daughter was sleeping. Downstairs, Beverly Cox was growing uneasy. That alarm had been ringing far too long. Fawn was never a heavy sleeper. Something about it nagged at her, a mother's intuition pulling at the edges of an ordinary morning. She called up to Felisa. "Go check on your sister." Felisa climbed the stairs, irritation mixing with the first thin thread of worry. She pushed open Fawn's door. "Come on," she said. "Wake up." And then she saw Fawn was lying completely still. There was an unnatural rigidity to her body. Her skin had turned a terrible shade of blue, and there was fabric, a gown, knotted tight around her neck. Felisa screamed. Beverly Cox came up those stairs faster than she had ever moved in her life. When she saw her daughter lying there, her mind simply refused the information, the way a mind does when confronted with something it cannot survive understanding. For one desperate, irrational second, she grasped at any explanation other than the real one. She dialed 911, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. The ambulance arrived within minutes. It was already hours too late. Fawn had been dead since the middle of the night, her body cold, the rigor of death already set in. The paramedics stepped back. There was nothing for them to do here. This was no longer a medical call. This was a crime scene. When Amber came home from babysitting across the street, she walked into a nightmare. Police cars lined the block. Yellow tape stretched across the front door of her own home. Investigators moved through the rooms where she had grown up. Her parents were in shock. Felisa was sobbing, and Amber stood on the street outside, trying to comprehend what she was looking at, trying to understand that her older sister, her protector, was gone, and there was something else Amber would carry for the rest of her life. That night, she was supposed to have been home. She was supposed to have been sleeping in the room she shared with Felisa, the room with the window the killer used. But she had been across the street, babysitting. The room had been empty. Every case on this channel is weeks of digging, real records, real documents, real lives. If this story is landing, take a second and hit like and subscribe. It keeps us going. And now, back to the bedroom, and the story the evidence told. The detectives who entered Fawn's bedroom understood immediately that this was no accident. She had been strangled. The medical examiner would confirm that strangulation was the cause of death. And she had also been sexually assaulted. This was not random violence. It was deliberate, intimate, and personal. But the crime scene told a confusing, contradictory story. In Fawn's closet, blankets had been yanked out and left in a heap on the floor. Down in the yard, beneath the window of Amber and Felisa's room, investigators found a stereo and a Nintendo console sitting in the grass, as though someone had thrown them out the window intending to collect them on the way out, then abandoned them in a panic or a hurry or a change of plan. The point of entry was clear. Someone had climbed John's orange dumpster truck, scrambled across the canopy of an adjacent outbuilding, and slipped through the unlocked second-floor window. Inside, crime scene technicians collected what physical evidence they could: short hairs that didn't belong to Fawn, small bloodstains, and, critically, traces of semen recovered from her bed sheet. In 1989, that biological evidence was almost useless. There was no national DNA database. There were no genetic profiles to build or compare. The best forensic science of the era could do was compare blood types, educated guesses, nothing close to an identity. They also found something strange: an old army cap in Fawn's room. No one in the family recognized it. Fawn never wore anything like it. Whose was it? It was a question that would never be fully answered. And there was the steak knife, the same one Fawn had used to wedge her broken door shut, found at the scene, possibly used against her, possibly used to force her into silence. One detail troubled investigators more than any other. Fawn's bed was on wheels. In a violent struggle, a bed on wheels should have rolled across the room, unless someone had held it steady. Did that mean there were two people in that room, one committing the assault, the other keeping the bed in place? But if so, why did the biological evidence point to only a single individual? It was a question that would hang over the case for 3 decades. The investigation moved fast at first. Police attention turned toward the 9th Street Dogs, the gang that ruled the surrounding blocks. And there was a thread connecting Fawn to that world. She had been dating someone with ties to the gang. After her murder, that boyfriend was so shattered that he enlisted in the military and left Kansas City altogether, as if he needed to put an ocean between himself and what had happened. Then, in August 1989, just 1 month after the murder, came what looked like a break. Police arrested 3 teenagers. One of them was in Fawn's class at Northeast High School. The other 2 were known associates. A witness had come forward with detailed, specific information, details the police had deliberately withheld from the public, the kind of information only someone connected to the crime could possibly know. For the first time since Fawn's death, the Cox family felt the ground steady beneath them. A grand jury charged one of the teenagers with first-degree murder. He spent 8 months in jail while prosecutors worked to build their case. It seemed, finally, like it was pointing somewhere real. And then it all came apart. The DNA from the crime scene didn't match. The fingerprints on the steak knife didn't match. And the witness, the single person holding the entire case together, suddenly recanted. They admitted they had lied. They stopped cooperating completely. Without that testimony, without any DNA tying the 3 teenagers to the assault and the murder, the prosecution had nothing left. The charges were dropped. All 3 walked free. But before they did, one of the teenagers confessed to something. During interrogation, he admitted that he and his friends had broken into the Cox house that night. He described it in detail, climbing the orange truck, crossing the canopy, slipping through the unlocked window. He gave information the police had never released, including the fact that when he threw a tape recorder out the window, its handle had snapped off. He told investigators exactly where he had hidden it, under a bush near the house. Police went and looked. It was there, precisely where he said it would be. This was not a guess. This was someone who had been inside that house on the night Fawn Cox was murdered. But he insisted they had only come to steal. They took the Nintendo, the stereo, some radios, threw the items out the window to grab on the way out. According to him, they never went into Fawn's room. They never saw her. They never knew a murder was happening or had happened. And then, just as suddenly, he withdrew the confession entirely and stopped talking. Without his cooperation, without DNA linking any of them to Fawn herself, the case had no foundation left to stand on. It went cold. For the Cox family, this was its own special torture. They knew those boys had been in the house. The confession had proven it. One of them had spent 8 months in jail. But knowing and proving are 2 entirely different things. And whoever had actually raped and strangled Fawn was still out there, walking free, while the case slowly froze over. Days became weeks, weeks became months, months became years, and the Cox family refused, absolutely refused, to let Fawn become just another forgotten name in a cold case file. Throughout the 1990s and into the 2000s, John and Beverly Cox became warriors for their daughter. They held fundraisers. They put up billboards across Kansas City. They offered reward money, $3,000 in 2000, growing to $10,000 by 2019. Beverly gave interview after interview, her voice steady and breaking in the same breath. "Money does a lot on the streets," she said. "That's what we're hoping and praying for." Amber, the little sister who had worshipped Fawn, became the family's relentless investigator. She scoured true crime forums and cold case websites, every corner of the internet where her sister's name might surface. When she found people discussing the case, she would reach out, thank them, ask if they knew anything real. In 2018, she posted detailed, non-public facts about the case on a verified cold case forum, and she explained something that haunted her still. Normally, she would have been asleep in that room. the room the intruder entered through. But that night, she had been babysitting across the street. The killer had either gotten extraordinarily lucky, or he had known the family's schedule well enough to know exactly what that night would offer. Despite everything, the case stayed frozen, and the reason was a combination of two cruel realities. The first was technology. In 1989, the DNA evidence simply couldn't be used to find a stranger. Even in the early 2000s, when the National CODIS database came online, Fawn's biological evidence was uploaded and checked against the profiles of thousands of convicted offenders. No match. The DNA didn't belong to anyone in the criminal system. As recently as a couple of years before the case broke, detectives re-interviewed the former teenage suspects, now grown men, and collected fresh DNA directly from them. No match again. The profile of Fawn's killer had existed for years. It just didn't belong to anyone law enforcement had ever sampled. The second cruel reality was money. Genetic genealogy, the breakthrough method that compares crime scene DNA against the millions of ordinary people who have uploaded their genetic data to ancestry websites, building family trees outward until a name emerges, is expensive. Only a handful of labs in the world can do it. The waiting lists stretch for years, and police departments, working within tight budgets, have to choose which cases get that costly priority. The Cox family watched, year after year, as other cold cases from the 1970s and 1980s were cracked open by genetic genealogy, the same science that had finally caught the Golden State Killer. And they couldn't understand why not Fawn's case, why not their daughter, their sister. In 2019, the family decided to take matters into their own hands. They raised the money themselves, the cost of the testing, the cost of the genealogical analysis, and walked into the police department ready for answers. And the police said no. It was not cruelty. Sergeant Ben Caldwell, who supervised the cold case unit, explained the impossible position. If the department accepted money from one family to push their case to the front of the line, it would create a two-tiered system of justice. Wealthy families could buy faster answers. Poorer families would wait indefinitely. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't right. The Cox family understood the logic, but understanding didn't ease the pain of it. As Felisa put it, with painful clarity, if this had been a rich family, or someone important, the case would have been solved long ago. She wasn't wrong. But in the summer of 2020, everything finally changed. In June 2020, the federal government launched Operation Legend, a major initiative to combat violent crime in American cities, named in memory of 4-year-old Legend Taliaferro, who had been murdered in Kansas City. And the operation brought with it exactly what the Cox family had been praying for 3 decades. Federal funding, FBI resources, access to advanced labs and genetic genealogy testing. Captain Ben Caldwell, recently promoted, saw the opening immediately. He submitted Fawn's case for the new testing. It was approved. The biological evidence collected back in 1989, the semen recovered from Fawn's bedsheet, evidence that had been preserved and waiting for 31 years, was sent to Parabon Nanolabs, one of the world's leading genetic genealogy firms. And then the family waited, the way they had always waited. But this time was different. This time, the answer came in a matter of weeks. On the 11th of November 2020, 31 years and nearly 4 months after Fawn Marie Cox was raped and strangled in her own bed, the Kansas City Police Department called the family with a name. It was the first murder the department had ever solved using advanced genetic genealogy, and the name shattered everything the family thought they knew. Donald Lee Cox Jr., not a stranger, not a 9th Street dog, not a faceless monster from the shadows of a dangerous neighborhood. Donald Cox was Fawn's cousin. He was 21 years old on the night he murdered her, just 5 years older than the girl he had known her entire life. He knew the house intimately because he had been welcomed into it, a guest at that family's table more times than anyone could count. He knew which windows stayed unlocked because he had watched that family live the way families live around the people they trust, without barriers, without suspicion. He knew Fawn would be alone upstairs that night. He knew Amber would be across the street babysitting. He knew Felisa slept downstairs near the air conditioning. He knew John slept like the dead. He knew all of it. the way you only know the inner workings of a family that has never once thought to hide itself from you. And he used every piece of that knowledge. He climbed the orange truck. He crossed the canopy. He went through the window that was always open. For 31 years after that night, Donald Cox sat at family dinners. He passed the salt at Christmas. He looked John and Beverly Cox in the eye at Thanksgiving. He attended Fawn's funeral and mourned alongside the very people whose daughter he had raped and strangled in her own bed. And he never said a single word. According to Amber, there had always been something dark about Donald. She would later reveal that he had sexually abused younger girls in the family, secrets buried in the particular silence that families sometimes mistake for protection, the things people don't say because saying them is unbearable. But murder, no one had ever let themselves go there. No one had imagined it. The Cox family would never get to confront Donald in a courtroom, because Donald Lee Cox Jr. had died in 2006, 14 years before science finally caught up to him. He died of a drug overdose. His death was investigated because of suspicious circumstances, though it was ultimately determined not to be the result of foul play. And during that investigation, the medical examiner had retained a blood sample, but because Donald had been the subject of a death inquiry, not a criminal suspect, his DNA was never entered into any criminal database. It simply sat in storage, waiting, without anyone knowing it was waiting. When Parabon built the genetic family tree from the 1,989 crime scene evidence, the branches led directly to Donald's family. Detectives requested that stored blood sample and compared it to the profile recovered from Fawn's bedroom in 1989. The semen from Fawn's bedsheet against the blood drawn during a 2006 autopsy. 100% match. He had been dead for 14 years. Science caught up with him anyway. Even with Donald identified, hard questions remained, and honesty requires naming them. What about the 3 teenagers who confessed to the burglary, whose stolen items had been found in the yard? Did Donald work with them? Was he part of the break-in, staying behind when the others fled? Or did he enter separately, hiding in that upstairs closet while the boys looted the floors below, waiting in the dark for his moment? Police closed the case without additional charges. Only Donald's DNA was found on Fawn. Whatever those boys knew or didn't know, whatever they did or didn't see, that crime belonged to Donald alone. And the troubling detail of the bed on wheels, the question of whether someone held it steady, closed with him too. He was 21. He had time and privacy and a sleeping house and no one coming. There is one more shadow at the edge of this story, and it should be spoken of carefully. That neighbor, Tracy Snow, the 20-year-old who vanished from the same neighborhood in 1984 and was never found. Her disappearance has never been connected to Donald Cox, and there is no evidence that links them. It stands only as a reminder of how much darkness that neighborhood swallowed in those years, how many questions were never answered, how many families were left waiting for someone who never came home. Donald Cox lived 17 years after murdering Fawn. He was arrested repeatedly for theft, for drugs. He caused harm in every direction he turned. And then, in 2006, his addiction killed him, and he died before a single person outside that house knew what he had done. Fawn Marie Cox was 16 years old. She was saving her tips, shift by shift, for a car she would never get to drive. She roller skated with her sisters on the weekends. She never missed church. She was Amber's protector, the one who stood up for her. She should be in her 50s today. She should have graduated, built a life, grown old alongside the sisters who loved her. Instead, she is frozen at 16, murdered in her own bed, in her own home, by someone she had no reason on earth to fear. Her family spent 31 years refusing to let that be the end of her story. Billboards, fundraisers, interviews, forum posts at midnight, Amber chasing every thread. Beverly on camera, her voice steady and broken at once. John and Beverly aging, still waiting, still there. When the answer finally came, Captain Caldwell said it as plainly as it could be said. "This one touched a lot of people," he said, because she was an innocent child who was murdered in her own bed. It rattled the detectives and officers who had worked it across the decades. Fawn's sister, Felisa, asked how it felt to finally know, found the words that hold both halves of the truth at once. "It's a relief," she said. "There's closure. The answers aren't always what we were asking for, but there's closure." The window on the second floor of that house was open because a family trusted their summer nights, their neighborhood, and each other. It was open because Amber had once climbed through it as a kid and everyone had laughed. It was open because the orange truck sat beneath it and nobody thought twice. The window that was always open was the window he used. That is not a lesson, and it is not a metaphor. It is simply what happened, and it cannot be unlocked from the other side. "She was my protector," Amber said. "She stood up for me." Rest in peace, Fawn Marie Cox. Your family never stopped fighting, and the truth, even after 31 years, even from a seat at the family table, finally found its way home. If this case stayed with you, and it should, leave a comment below and tell us which moment landed hardest. Hit like and subscribe to Crime View Central. Every comment, every like, keeps us going, and keeps cases like Fawn's from staying cold. We'll see you in the next one.